I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. It's about 9:03, and I think all the stragglers from the 1 inch of snow we got have arrived hopefully safely. Looks like we have a pretty good online turnout. So welcome to Great Salt Lake Tech Team meeting. We'll start with some introductions. My name is Marisa Weinberg. I'm with the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, and serving as the interim Great Salt Lake coordinator. Happy to lead this meeting for the first time. Happy to have you all here, and please bear with me as this is the first time I'm doing this. So feedback is welcome. So yeah, we'll just go around the room. Feel free to introduce yourself and where you're with. We'll start with you, Wayne.
I'm Wayne Wurtsbaugh, from Emeritus Professor at Utah State University in the Watershed Sciences Department, the Ecology Center.
I'm Sarah Knoll. I'm a current professor at Watershed Sciences at Utah State University.
I'm Craig Miller. I'm with Utah Division of Water Resources.
Anne Neville with the Nature Conservancy.
Phil Brown, the Shrimp Cooperative.
Ben Starman with Forestry, Fire, and State Lands.
Bill Johnson, University of Utah.
Jennifer Bix with Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. And Keith, you want to?
You can back to Forestry, Fire, and State Lands.
Scott Henick, USGS.
Tom Bishop with Brian, University of Utah. You with that. Gage Square,
Kate Rubelman, Rio Tinto. Teresa Cockayne, Rio Tinto.
Blake Bingham, Water Rights. Laura Vernon, Water Research.
Great. Looks like we've got a pretty good online turnout. I'll go ahead and just read off people's names to make this a little quicker. So we've got Andrew Rupke, Brian Reyna, Chris Klein, Christopher Stallard, Christy Swan, Diana Dunn, Diane Lund, Elliot Jagniecki, Emily Hamill, Hector Zamora, Hugh Herlow, Jim Harris, John Luft, Jack Ray, Lauren Head, Paul Inkenbrandt, Rob Dubuque, Rob Hartman, Sean Harrison, Tom Dutta, and Susan Zarkarizi. I believe that's everyone. So we'll go ahead and jump into updates. You should have all received a digital agenda if you're on the listserv. If you're not on the listserv and want to receive meeting emails and such, feel free to check the box on the sign-in sheet and I will make sure you're added to that. Additionally, we have printed agendas in the corner over there if you'd like a copy of the agenda for yourself right now. But we'll go ahead and dive into updates. So for the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, the only update I have today, our next meeting will be March 8th at the Eccles Wildlife Center in Farmington. At that meeting, Tim Hawks will present a legislative update. The session will have ended by that date, so should be a great update hearing about all the Great Salt Lake legislation. Emma Whitaker will also discuss the Open and Public Meetings Act at that meeting, and Glenn Merrill will talk about the 22-23 water year. So it should be a great meeting. Everyone is welcome to attend. We'll be virtual and in person. And now I'll defer to Ben for a Salinity Advisory Committee update.
Thanks, Marissa. So the main update we have is that we did modify the berm. Many of you saw there was an executive order from the governor on February 3rd, and by the 7th, we were able to work with Union Pacific to start filling the channel, and so it was raised to a level of 4192. It's out there doing its job now, damming the water into the south arm, and they are putting the final touches, cleaning things up right now. We should cross our fingers for a good runoff season so we get all the good benefits from the good snow year.
Can you repeat that elevation?
The elevation of the berm was brought to 4192.
Thank you, Ben.
And raised from what level?
Oh, excuse me, it was raised from an elevation of 4187, which was that was raised in August, and the goal then was to just keep those north arm brines from flowing back into the south arm. Now the goal is to completely impound those flows into the south arm.
Great. Thanks, Ben. And then moving on to tech team updates. As you all know, the past couple of months, we've been collecting hot topic suggestions. And I'm pleased to announce that our subcommittee has whittled those down from 31 to 4 broad topics.
An axe.
More than that.
And so just so you all know, these are the broad general 4 topics that we were able to boil those down to. And the approach the subcommittee is taking this year, we're trying to keep these hot topics exceptionally broad in order to solicit a wide range of proposals. These are not targeted for any specific study, any specific method. We want to ensure that the proposals we receive are from a variety of different disciplines, different methods. And so hopefully by going about it this way, we're able to get some really good research proposals and issue some grants before the fiscal year ends. And so if anyone has any questions about this, these are not the final wordsmithing to go in the RFP. We still got a little bit of work to do, but we're hoping to get the RFP drafted and posted shortly. And hopefully next year when we solicit these hot topics, we'll go about it a little bit differently and, you know, maybe a little more tailored to broad topics such as these. So more to come with that. And we'll be sending out the RFP to the listserv shortly in the coming weeks. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. And as always, you can call me or email me if anything comes up. I'm happy to address your questions.
Does anybody want to hear what those 4 topics are? Would that be helpful, or did you already see them?
So they're a little bit small on the screen, and I can make these a little bigger. If anyone would like me to read out the topics, but we're focusing on four main areas, research needs on the lake concerning water levels and water quality, mapping, surveying, and data repository, ecosystem dynamics, and then water budget and in-lake routing. So if you'd like to know more, reach out to me. It's like Chris has a question.
Yeah. Would it be possible to post a link to that in the notes or you know, in the chat so that we can take a look at it?
Yes, I can definitely put this in the chat. We're also
Actually, Chris, if we can wait on that, I wouldn't want to confuse anybody by making folks think that this is the final RFP. So if we can wait maybe a day or two, we finalized these yesterday, and as far as what the broad topics are, but I think we still just need a little bit of love to get to the final point where we're going to be coming it out in an RFP.
Okay.
Thanks, Ben. Any questions in the meantime, though, Chris? I'm happy to.
What's the 4th one? It's like we can only see down to the 2nd line of the 3rd one. Okay, thanks.
Can I just say real quick that the process, you know, wasn't to get from 31 down to 4. It wasn't a matter of taking an axe to the 31. It was a matter of kind of a net, right?
Yeah.
To group them.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you, Bill. Appreciate that.
I'd also like maybe just to say one thing. This year we're a couple months ahead of when we would normally put out an RFP, and that was a request based on this committee or the tech team to do this earlier, so folks have more time to prepare before the start of the fiscal year. So we came into this a little bit more aggressive than we normally do, but again, the goal is to give folks plenty of time to prepare and get their proposals finalized before they have to start spending money and getting into the research.
Appreciate that, Ben. Did anyone else have questions about hot topics, concerns about hot topics? I'll definitely reach out with an email shortly with the RFP. The only other tech team updates, we have 3 other meeting dates this year: May, September, and December. If you have any presentation thoughts, ideas, ways to fill this meeting time, please reach out to me. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But that's kind of it. So we'll start with our first presentation. Actually, maybe we'll start with Hector's because I need to figure yours out real quick if that's all right.
Sure.
Hector, where are you, Hector?
He was online. Yeah.
Oh, he might be doing it from his office. Okay, he was just in here. Hector, if you wouldn't mind going first.
Sure.
Yes.
Thank you, Ben. So Hector will be presenting on estimates of groundwater flow and its salinity contribution to Great Salt Lake. So anytime you're ready, Hector.
Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, yes. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Hector Zamora. I'm a hydrogeologist with the Utah Geological Survey. I just started working on last year on July 2022. And yes, so today I'll be talking about this study that I'm currently working on along with my colleague, Paul Inkenbrand, also from the Geological Survey. And yes, on estimating groundwater flow and salinity contribution to the Great Salt Lake. So this is just how the presentation is organized. I'll start with some background briefly, then I'll go over the objectives, study area, the methods, the results, and a summary of the presentation. So a little bit of background. Groundwater discharge is an important component in lakes' hydrologic and chemical balances, but it is often neglected or underestimated because it is hard to quantify. In the Great Salt Lake, surface water flows and their salt loading are well constrained, but groundwater recharge remains relatively unknown. And yes, understanding the groundwater component and its solute input is important for managing the environmental and economic resources of the Great Salt Lake. And yeah, also understanding the whole groundwater dynamics and the role in the overall health of the GSL becomes exacerbated by the current low lake levels. So the objectives of this study, given the significance of groundwater to the Great Salt Lake system, are to create generalized potentiometric surface maps using historical groundwater level data in basin field wells. And I have generalized here in bold because we didn't really try to differentiate between confined and unconfined aquifers. The second objective is to calculate groundwater flow to the Great Salt Lake using a combination of spatial analysis techniques and Darcy's law. And we use the results from number 2 with existing groundwater chemistry data to estimate salinity inputs to the Great Salt Lake derived from groundwater. So the map on the right shows the location of this study area in a red outline. The area covers around 11,000 square miles. You can also see the area of the Great Salt Lake at 4,200 feet, which covers about 1,700 square miles, and that's the average elevation. And also at 4,190 feet above sea level, which covers around 900 square miles. In the map, you can also see the location of the Jordan, the Bear, and the Weaver rivers, which deliver on average about 3 million acre feet of water to the GSL, or about 95% of the inflow, and 14 million metric tons of TDS. The groundwater discharge to the GSL is estimated to range between 3 to 10% of the total inflow, but the relationship between groundwater and GSL salinity is not well defined. So the methods, we compile available data from different sources. We reprojected, combined, and aggregated this data using Python 3. The spatial analysis, including data interpolation and the calculations of groundwater seepage velocity and cell loading, were done on ArcGIS Pro. And so the map on the right shows the sites with available water level data under source. So we compile water level data and well property data from different sources, including the USGS National Water Information System, the Department of Water Rights, and different Utah Geological Survey databases. The map on the right shows about 10,000 sites. Not all of these sites are visited on a regular basis. So this table shows the distribution of unique sites visit every decade. Ideally, we wanted to create a map, a groundwater level map for every year, but it is a little difficult to do this, not just because of what data is available. Not many of the sites are visited regularly or yearly. So we created two different data sets. The first data set, which you can see labeled Table 1, contains data available from all sources. Groundwater level data on each site were grouped by decade, and mean water level elevation value was calculated if there was more than a single measurement during this time frame. The second data set on Table 2 contains only USGS data. Here the data, the groundwater level elevation value is the mean of all available data for each site. And this data set also contains estimated aquifer properties, including saturated thickness, hydraulic conductivity, and transmissivity for individual sites. We calculated the saturated thickness by subtracting the mean depth to water from the total well depth values. The hydraulic conductivity values were extracted from layer 2 of the USGS groundwater model of the Great Basin carbonate and alluvial aquifers by Brooks from 2017. And finally, the transmissivity values were calculated also by multiplying the saturated thickness times the hydraulic conductivity. So the data interpolation was done on ArcGIS Pro using empirical Bayesian kriging regression prediction. This is just a geostatistical interpolation method that uses explanatory rasters known to affect the value of the data that we're interpolating, such as elevation. The maps that you can see show the piezometric surface from the 1980s, 2010, and some of the aquifer properties. These are really a little hard to see, but they're just for illustration, and I'll go in detail a little bit more for some of this. So the groundwater seepage velocity around the GSL was estimated using the Darcy flow tool in ArcGIS Pro. In this method, the groundwater seepage velocity, or B, is calculated on a cell basis using the difference in heads between two adjacent cells and the harmonic average of the transmissivities. The Darcy flow tool requires 4 data sets as input, which you can see on the right. The groundwater elevation, groundwater head elevation, which is on B, the saturated thickness on C, and the transmissivity on D. And also we need a value for effective formation porosity. So we created the first 3 data sets by interpolating the aquifer property data that I show you in table 2. And we assigned the effective formation porosity a value of 0.35 for the basin field area. So the output of this calculation is a magnitude raster where each of the cell value represents an average linear velocity in the center of the cell, in this case in feet per day. So from this output, we extracted the groundwater seepage velocity around the Great Salt Lake using zonal statistics. It's table in ArcGIS Pro for both the 4190 and the 4200 feet above sea level shape files of the lake. And finally, we multiply the groundwater seepage velocity times the mean aquifer thickness, which we estimated from table 2 to be around 232 feet, and the perimeter of the Great Salt Lake obtained from the GSL shape files. So we use this data to obtain an estimated groundwater contribution in acre feet per year. In 2019, the Utah Geological Survey staff mapped groundwater quality and chemistry in the GSL area. So the map on the right shows a raster with TDS values in waters in the area. These values range from about 91 to 88,000 milligrams per liter. And we use the results of this open file report to estimate TDS values around the GSL. So the results and discussion. This slide shows groundwater elevation in the Salt Lake Valley for the 1980s on the left and the 2010s on the right. So just some general observations from this. The potentiometric surface maps show similar patterns for the 2 decades, water flowing from high to elevations to low elevations. 2 general observations that we can see here is that the 4300 contour line has moved a little bit upstream in the 2010s. In this area compared to here. And there's a few cones of depression north of the Okir Mountains and in some areas of West Bountiful. So this map on the left shows the groundwater level difference between the 1980s and the 2010s in wells across the study area. The circles show a decline, if you can see on the explanation. And the triangles show an increase in water level. So just in around 90% of the wells in the area show a decline ranging from 1 to 86 feet. And there was a mean decline in water levels in these wells of 10 feet from the 1980s to the 2010s. So these groundwater level declines are consistent with historical trends in the Salt Lake, the Tool, and Curly values, where water levels dropped between 15 and 40 feet from 1975 to 2005. These water level drops are associated with increased withdrawals from municipal, industrial, and agricultural use, and less than average precipitation in the basin. It is also estimated that the GSL basin lost around 8.8 million acre feet of groundwater, while the Great Salt Lake lost around 4.5 million acre feet of water just during the 2012 to 2016 drought. And this this is a hydrograph just showing the water level changes in one of the wells near the Great Salt Lake from 1958 to 2020. So these tables show the calculations and the results for groundwater discharge to the GSL. The estimates we obtained range from 310 thousand to 410 thousand acre feet per year. If we divide the section in different, if we divide the GSL by section in west, south, and north sections, so we have contributions of ranging from about 50,000 to 400,000 acre feet per year. So this shows the average groundwater. This table shows the average groundwater discharge, which is about 348,000 acre feet per year, an average TDS of 2,500 milligrams per liter. This is on the table on the left, and we also have some results for the contribution by section of TDS, which you can see on the table on the right. So just a little bit more results and discussion. The groundwater flux ranges. We have an average about 347,000 acre-feet per year. This estimate is a little higher than previous estimates derived from water balance studies, which are around 75,000 acre-feet per year. But it's consistent with more recent estimates derived from geochemical modeling of GSL chemistry, which range suggest about 10% of the total inflow, or around 300,000 acre-feet per year, are derived groundwater flux. The larger groundwater contributions originate in the east and the north sections of GSL, where the hydraulic gradients are the steep. The large groundwater flows from the north are likely explained by high transmissivity values in the areas around Park and the Curly valleys. The south loading that we estimated is about 1.18 million metric tons per year, which is about 10% of the solids carried by the Jordan, the Bear, and the Weaver rivers to the GSL in 2013. The highest TDS concentrations were found in the west-south sections of the GSL, where the gradients, hydraulic gradients, are shallow and there's a high evapotranspiration. Just a summary, so we observe groundwater level declines in most of the basin fill aquifers from the 1980s to 2010s. These are consistent with historical groundwater level trends in the Salt Lake, Tuelle, and Curly and Weber valleys. And they're likely a result of aquifer overdraft associated with less than average precipitation in the basin and increased withdrawals for human consumption. We estimated a groundwater flux to GSL of 347,000 acre-feet per year. This is higher than previous calculations, but it's derived from water balance studies, but it's consistent with estimates derived from geochemical modeling of GSL water chemistry. And finally, we estimated a salt contribution from groundwater to GSL of 1.18 million metric tons per year, which represents about 10% of the solids derived from surface flow to GSL in 2013. And that's all I have for today.
Awesome. Thank you, Hector. Does anyone online or in the room have questions for Hector? Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, Hector, nice demonstration of, corralling all that water level data. It's an interesting approach. I noticed that, you converted those hydraulic gradients to a flux using Darcy's law.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, the other parameter in that is the hydraulic conductivity.
Yes.
In the slide that you show for the hydraulic conductivities that you used, they varied very little across the values that you reported.
You mean on the transmissivity one?
Nope, the hydraulic conductivity, because the thicknesses do vary, but the hydraulic conductivity is the key parameter, and you showed the values of hydraulic conductivity in one of your slides previous to this one.
That has it to the lower.
Oh, I didn't see it.
The last column on the lower.
There he is. They almost don't vary, and yet if I took a homogeneous material,
Mm-hmm.
it would vary probably on the order of magnitude.
Yeah. So this is only these are only around 8-10 points from the data set. So this is just showing how the table was organized. But yeah, in reality, I think there is a little bit more variability. And
yeah, I think it's more than a little in the reality. And
yeah, so I think that this one is
Does it show, does it have a hydraulic conductivity map? That one?
This one on T, this is the transmissivity. And so I think that this one shows a little bit more how the hydraulic conductivity changes because the thickness is a constant, is relatively constant.
And Hector, finish my question off. That assumes the thickness, right? You're assuming the hydraulic conductivity is basically constant at one single value and putting all the variability into thickness. And so there are ways to actually ground truth these things, these fluxes, through groundwater age dating. And one thing to consider here is the University of Utah is a world leader in groundwater age dating. Kip Solomon runs the Noble Gas Lab. He's a world expert in that analysis. And those kinds of analyses can be brought to bear to determine whether or not the ages of the groundwater actually corroborate the fluxes that you're calculating.
Yes. Yeah, so we're currently working on I'm currently collecting groundwater samples around the GSL, and we'll be using tritium and carbon-14. I think the idea of this study was to just, it's a really large area, and I think there's a lot of certainty in the method that we're using, just, because we have the data varies with time. There's not really at least that I know, a network of wells that are being measured on a yearly or seasonal basis. We're also using a constant porosity value for the whole area, which is very unlikely to happen.
Porosity won't affect things too much, but the hydraulic gradients will. And for example, we have two transects on the east side of Farmington Bay. We've been studying the last couple of years. The gradients are extremely dynamic, both the vertical and the lateral.
Yeah.
And so that also, I agree, is another source of, to look into further. But I'd encourage you to broaden beyond tritium and carbon-14. Those will be limited utility. There are other age dating techniques that are available right up the hill. I really strongly encourage you to connect with people up there.
It's strong gradient up the hill.
Yeah, let me. So this is Paul Inkenbrand here with the Utah Geological Survey. Couple comments in the chat there. Hector is currently working on additional age dating. We do work closely with the U of U when we're able to. We have that table is just a small sample of some of the values listed, just to give you an idea of the structure. And this study was kind of like a first pass. We really didn't have even good initial estimates. And so the Darcy flux approach is just a really good kind of first pass to get us some good round numbers, and then we can move forward with more detailed. We're going to submit a grant application to get some better definition of vertical and hydraulic or horizontal hydraulic head across the interface between the shore and the lake bed. And we're going to try to gain detail as we move forward. But first, we need some of the fundamentals just to get an idea of roughly what's going on.
Well, I encourage you to bring Kip into your study. He's got, 40 years of experience doing this exact kind of work.
Yeah, Bill, this is Hugh. We've worked with Kip's lab for a long time. We're well aware of it. This is a preliminary broad scale look, and it sets the stage for more refined flow path delineation using the kinds of serial sampling and that you're describing. And Hector has already started that, and it's going to continue this spring.
And I'm just encouraging you to move beyond using the analyses to actually also employing the expertise.
And question, because I want to make sure they understand. So we're not going to take this number to the bank.
No.
Okay, right? This is the setting the stage. This is a really good start of understanding the groundwater inputs and the salinity inputs. into the Great Salt Lake water balance and some slowing downs. But we needed to do this apparently before we could potentially go on to other things. Maybe. So there's a bunch of raised hands apparently.
Yeah. So Chris, I think yours was raised first. Go ahead.
Going back to that previous slide that you just showed with the transmissivity, yeah. I just wanted to ask and kind of point out, it looks like the area on the east side of the lake has really got kind of the most value as groundwater storage. It's got the, greatest thickness and most transmissivity. That's also an area that's just being hugely developed. Would this be something that could translate into, policy information or implementation information as far as kind of prioritizing, trying to maintain and promote groundwater storage in this area despite the development? Am I kind of interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I still think that area is what contributes most to the lake in terms of groundwater. I personally think that one of the things that we need to focus on would be potentially having a network of monitoring wells in that area. I think that just having groundwater level data collected on at least a yearly basis would be really important. Just not only in terms of policy, but also, I think that would be great in terms of studying, what's happening in the groundwater in the area.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Chris. I think Elliot was next.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, Hector has done such a good job, and it is in alignment with Salute geochemical modeling, and they both are in good agreement for the most part for understanding solute load and salinity driven gradients entering the lake. So it really just shows that we are starting all this right now, but for the most part, things are in agreement. So we just have to keep collecting data, get the age dates, and have more wells, basically.
Thanks, Elliot. Sam, go ahead.
So my question was, the estimate of water flux you guys are getting through the groundwater. How does that compare against the water coming through the Bear River and other surface sources?
It's about 10% of the surface flows.
Okay.
Flows or loads?
Our calculation?
10% of the loads, right? Not 10%.
Oh yeah, it's also 10% of the solids. It's about 10% on both, pretty much.
So then that means that the groundwater has the exact same concentration as the surface water inflows? Would be the conclusion, which there's no way you got 2,500 milligrams per liter coming in those inflows in the surface.
No, so the average the value that we use is just it's an average of all the TDS values available in the area, pretty much. So we used two estimates. We calculated two values. one just using the TDS values of all the wells that Stefan Kirby and that we see in this study. The other one was by extracting the values in this raster around the GSL. So that's how we got the TDS estimate that we use.
Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a comment on the salt balance and the geochemical, or maybe it's a question too, but in this, when you do the salt balance for the lake, you have to consider how much salt is leaving the lake via dust from the playas and via aerosols during storm events, and that could be a pretty huge amount. So I don't know if that's gone into those geochemical methods or not, but it's something we probably very difficult to estimate, but probably a big component too. Hector, I have a very general question. There's dozens of assumptions that go into a model like this, and in the end, we don't get a plus or minus confidence interval on it. But you're more knowledgeable about these things, so if you had to put a plus or minus estimate on it, is that error on the water flux from groundwater, is it plus or minus 10%, plus or minus 50%, plus or minus 100%? I don't do these things, so I don't have a feel for it, but it would be valuable for the rest of us to have a feel for that.
I would say that probably, if there's a value of, I would say probably around 100,000 acre feet, plus or minus.
Plus or minus 100,000.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's helpful.
Does anyone else have questions for Hector in the room or online?
Just one last comment. So Hector, I know I was a bit rough, but what I want to say is, and this is also to Elliot, you used a generalized approach and said that it agrees with another generalized approach. That doesn't surprise me. And so recognize that. And as a scientist, I'm obligated to point that out, that this is no way an answer to the question. It's two generalized approaches that agree with one another, but that are not accounting for the dynamics of the system or the variability in the conductivity. And so I just feel the need to point that out. And I agree that the work that you're doing is useful, keep going, but it's important to make those points as part of the data that you're presenting.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There's a lot of uncertainty in this study. Just because of the nature of the data and the area, it's it's a really big area. So, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty in this. In the end, what we're trying to get is just, we're using averages. We're using averages of averages to try to get to a more or less reasonable number.
One other short comment. There's very few wells out on the east, to the west of the North Arm, so getting some wells in there would be really useful. And also the dynamics of it, the temporal dynamics, is just Craig Miller put together a graph showing the flow coming in from one of the creeks into the not public shooting grounds, what's the name?
Bird refuges?
The bird refuges at the north end of the North Arm. Anyway, that had I think the mean flow was, I don't remember the numbers, average of 10 CFS per year early on, had decreased to 0.5 or something like that. Just this massive decrease. Don't quote those numbers at all, but that was one of the assumptions or hypotheses for that was the pivot agriculture up on the south slope of the Raft River range. So hydrodynamic situation temporarily, at least at that site. And that'd probably apply to the groundwater, I would guess.
So it looks like we have one last question from Lynn, and then we'll move on to your presentation, Wayne. So the question is, will funding from the GSL Basin Study be available to help with your continuing work?
Can I jump in on that? This is Hugh. So
Go ahead, Hugh.
right now, we've been using some of the funds from the study, the cooperative study we have with the U.S. Geological Survey on their groundwater flow model, because much of this data will, well, as the tech team grant runs out, as much of this data will contribute to that regional scale groundwater flow model. And we don't, I would say we don't know yet whether or how funding from either the Bureau of Rec Basin Study or the legislator funded integrated water assessment can be used or will be used. Those are both still in the early design phases.
Great, thanks, Hugh.
Thanks.
So we'll move on to Wayne's presentation now. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, Wayne, and then.
Okay.
If you want to start.
Okay, thanks for coming via Zoom or driving down here. This is a presentation I made at the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council last month, I guess. So if you have a good memory, you can just doze off now because it's pretty much the same. Or if your memory's bad, maybe this will all seem new to you. So this is a paper I published with Samaya Seema, an Iranian scientist, just a few months ago, and it compares Lake Urmia in Iran with the Great Salt Lake, and they're surprisingly similar. They both have downward trends in water, and as we'll see, Lake Urmia is a much more serious situation. But it led to some relatively new insights on how water gets managed and why a lot of our lakes are drying up. So Lake Urmia is in the northwest corner of Iran there. It's the largest lake in Iran, and it's really highly valued, although they, as we'll see, they haven't treated it that well. Very similar landscape to what we have here in Utah, with highlands, large cities, ski areas, and rivers feeding into the lake. Dr. Seema is in the Faculty of Civil and Environmental Engineering in Tehran, and she did a sabbatical here, worked with David Rosenberg and Sarah Knoll, myself, and some others in 20 and 21. And she's sort of a geochemist, hydrologist, remote sensing type of person, so she brought a lot of expertise, and we really valued her collaboration. So the remarkable similarity is you can start with just satellite imagery, and side by side the lakes look pretty darn similar. They're both divided in half by causeways, so ours by the railway causeway and theirs by a automobile causeway that joins the east and west sides of the lake. The elevations are almost identical. The lake areas before they've been desiccated are very similar. You can see the current lake areas as of September aren't so similar. We're at about 46% of our natural area, and Urmia is at 31%, or probably less right now. Lake volume is greater in Great Salt Lake, and that's because the mean depth is substantially greater, although they're both very shallow lakes, given their lateral expanse. So we had a little bit of more depth to play with. Watershed areas almost identical in the two basins. Irrigated agriculture is much higher in Lake Urmia than we have here. Was that almost 4 times that what we have? And the population in the watershed is about double in Lake Urmia than we have here. So there's greater pressure to use the available fresh water going into the lake. Both Iran and Utah have very high growth rates, about 1.9% per year. Iran had a few thousand-year head start on us and getting their population up. And so human density, population and densities are higher there than in Utah. So the top one shows the growth rate, and the bottom frame there is the population density in the actual watersheds. And numbers per square kilometer, and it's about double in density in the watershed in Iran. To support those growing populations, Iran and Utah began major irrigation projects. Utah began earlier with major reservoirs back in the 30s and 40s and kind of stepped it up literally there, at least in this graph. On the right, you can see the billions of acre feet of the cumulative that we have. Like in the Lake Urmia Basin, they were much slower to get going, and it wasn't until around the early 2000s that they started a major construction of dams and irrigation systems. And in part, that was driven by Western sanctions on the country. And so they had a move to be more self-sufficient, but in terms of food production. And as you can see in that top graph, the storage capacity of Lake Urmia watershed is 188% of that in the Great Salt Lake watershed. And again, they have about the same watershed area, so they're capturing a big part of their inflows. The use of that water, the graph on the left, you've probably seen before. We've got agriculture is roughly in our basin about 63% of the use. Domestic and industry about 11%. Solar ponds, pumping water out of the Great Salt Lake into the solar ponds for mineral production, 13%, and other around 13%. Lake Urmia Basin, simpler breakdown, but with agriculture, even greater dominance of the water use, 89%, and domestic and industry around 11%. A problem or a benefit, depending on your perspective, is that the freeze-free period, or the period where you can grow irrigated crops at Great Salt Lake, roughly 187 days in the basin, and Lake Urmia considerably longer, 232 days. So they can divert water and use that water for farming for a considerably longer period than we have. Right? And that's a consequence of the latitude of the Lake Urmia Basin being less, they're closer to the equator, if you will. And so it's warmer there, even though we're at the same elevation. And in the Urmia watershed, grains and cereals are 81% of the production, forage plants 16%, vegetables 3%. And I didn't find data, although it's probably available, but we know that alfalfa and corn are the dominant users of water for agriculture in the Great Salt Lake watershed. Lake Urmia Basin and most of Iran has limited agricultural land, with most crop production occurring in the irrigated valleys like you see in that picture on the left. And in contrast, in the U.S., not necessarily here in Utah, but in the U.S. has extensive agricultural lands, and Iowa and Kansas and so on in the Great Plains that can supply food for Utah. And food production in Utah is relatively low, really. We talk about being self-sufficient in our food production, but I ran across this publication by Bingham et al. Last year, I think it was 2022. The date's getting covered by that sharing emblem, but and they were able to look at throughout the country, county by county, how much food was actually produced in those counties. All right, and most counties in the Great Salt Lake Basin provide less than 15% of their own food. So we're importing food from the rest from elsewhere in the country to supply our needs. Okay. And so, as I said earlier, consequently, although we talk about providing water for agriculture so that we can be self-sufficient, that's a bit of a myth. Utah's agricultural production and processing industries represent about 2.7% of the state's GDP. That's the 2020 data I found. And agriculture is also a small employer of the population of the Great Salt Lake Basin, about 1%. In comparison, in Urmia, it's 28%. So a huge difference there on the reliance on agriculture. Now, although we don't produce that much food for ourselves here, there are other benefits of agriculture. So this is a pasture, that lower right picture is a pasture near my home in North Logan. And I enjoy having that pasture there and being able to walk my dog there rather than it being in housing. So when we look at this, I don't think we need to be talking so much about food self-sufficiency, but perhaps other benefits of agriculture. So most of you have seen this graph before multiple times. The consumptive use has slowly driven down the level of Great Salt Lake. Greg Miller estimated they had a mean elevation. If we hadn't been diverting water, that blue line there, he estimated that lake would have an elevation of 1,282 meters, or 4,207 feet, I think that is in English units. And that the red line shows the actual lake elevations, or actual elevations of the south arm, I should say, not the whole lake. And that drought's driven that down about 1.8 meters, and consumptive use over the decades about 3.4 meters. All right, so we're at very low elevation now, as we all know. Lake Urmia, well, going back, part of our problem initially, before Craig did the modeling on this, is people said, well, the lake goes up, the lake goes down, we're not having an impact on it. But once the modeling was done, yes, we are having an impact on it by diverting water for all our uses we put it to. Lake Urmia was more obvious. Once those dams went in the early 2000s, the lake level just started to plummet down to very low levels. And you can see that September 2022 satellite imagery shows just how dried up the lake is, and barely any connections between their north arm and their south arm. They didn't need a berm. They dried it up sufficiently to split them up. Like here, there's been little long-term change in precipitation in the Urmia Basin. So most of the decrease in the lake level of Lake Urmia has been due to consumptive uses, and particularly for agriculture. As we all know, when the lakes go down, most of the salt remains behind, and we can see this is a graph. The red shows the north of the arm here, salinity, and the solid red line, the south arm salinity in the Great Salt Lake. And Again, that bounces around a lot with wet and dry cycles, but we've been relatively stable since about 2000 in the Great Salt Lake here. But we don't have the last data on here, and things are headed up, and we're approaching what 180 grams per liter. Phil,
It went over that. It's dropped down now that the inflow's come in.
yeah. But Lake Urmia is even much more serious here. So the salinities that have been driven up, and they're over 350 grams per liter. Right? And it's changed. Lake Urmia was, like the Great Salt Lake, a sodium chloride dominated system. Now it's much more balanced with magnesium and sulfates and sodium and chloride. The impacts of salinity on Artemia, that we have two different species. In the Great Salt Lake, we have the Artemia franciscana, where they have Artemia endemic species, Artemia urmiana, and it's a larger species. It grows up to around 14 millimeters, where our Artemia is down around 11 or 12 as maximum adult size. And this graph, Samaya and I put together for a publication that a number of us had, shows salinity range here on the x-axis and the density and numbers per cubic meter, right? And the blue dots here are for the Great Salt Lake from the Great Salt Lake Ecosystem Project. And although I drew a line on there showing a decline in density with increasing salinities up to close to 200 grams per liter, 190 maybe, the decline isn't significant, right? But there's a suggestion things are bad. And there wasn't a statistically significant decline for the Artemia and Lake Urmia. These data are not nearly as reliable as what we have here. We have done a lot of work on the ecology of the lake over decades, and we have very good monitoring now, particularly for brine shrimp and some other parameters. That's not the case for Lake Urmia. So these red dots here are kind of cobbled together from different authors who use different methods, and I did my best to make them similar, but it shows a general decline, but still with significant numbers of brine shrimp up over 275 or even 300 grams per liter. So given that we don't have a statistically significant decline here, it kind of remains to be seen what the decline might look like as we move up into higher salinities. One of the detailed hot topics that got thrown out was to look better at salinity effects on Artemia and brine flies, and that needs to be done. As an example of the difference in the work that's been done on the ecology of the two lakes, we have some density data on brine fly larvae and black brine flies in the lake. In Urmia, they're just known to exist. No information on that. So we have a big head start in that regard. There was a late start on the Lake Urmia project, or maybe the decline in the lake level came on them so fast they couldn't get their act together. But they started in the Lake Urmia Recovery Project in 2013, and they initially dedicated $5 billion to that. I don't know how much was actually spent, and politicians will like to throw out big numbers that we're going to solve this problem. But they took it on in a big way, but the lake was only at 12% of its natural volume when they took on the recovery effort. They set a target recovery elevation of 1,274 meters and a salinity of 270 grams per liter that they thought would support brine shrimp and the birds that fed on them. And they have iconic species there, as the flamingos that are now largely gone. This 270 grams per liter was based on really flimsy data because they didn't really have good information on what the brine shrimp needed, but at least they set a target, right? And they've moved forward. Utah, here we initiated the recovery effort when the lake was about 30% of its natural volume. And so we had that head start. Couple bleak pictures of the lakes that were. Lake Urmia used to have a ferry that transported people before the automobile causeway was put in. It's in, let's say, dry dock right now. And the south shore of the Great Salt Lake doesn't look much different. So some differences in the management approaches. Utah managers recognize the environmental importance of wetlands and have dedicated about 13% of the inflows going into the diked wetlands that support shorebirds and waterfowl and all sorts of species. And at Lake Urmia, there's been a really narrow focus on getting water into the lake as fast as they can to reach that target elevation, right? So that's involved things like channelization of the rivers through the wetlands, the existing natural wetlands, to route water directly to the lake. In addition to a target goal, they estimated that the lake would need 2.78 million acre feet per year, right? And they said to reach that, we'll need to reduce agricultural water use by 40%, right? And they set out to transfer some water that used to go, or well, still is going, but flowed into the Tigris river that would go into Iraq. So they thought, we'll capture our headwater portion of that, put it through a $3.2 billion, 36-kilometer long tunnel, and bring it into Lake Urmia. The results, although they set some good goals, target levels and things, the results haven't been good. So releases from upstream reservoirs for agricultural use have been reduced, but little of the saved water has really actually reached the lake due to uncontrolled water withdrawal between the dams and the lake. So there's all sorts of pumps along the river. There's a huge amount of groundwater pumping. So although they've been making efforts, the farmers, understandably, I would argue, haven't been that cooperative. Since 2013, when their recovery efforts started, Lake Urmia has only received its complete water allocation in 2 out of 9 years. And we've seen graphs of and satellite imagery that show the effect of that. The tunnel is not yet completed, and the lake is still near its all-time low level, ecologically dysfunctional, hyper saline, and creating severe dust storms from the dried lake bed. So the moral, it's easier to provide water for farmers than it is to take it away. And I think we'll be seeing that here when we make serious efforts to getting more water into the Great Salt Lake. Great Salt Lake recovery efforts, no target elevation nor inflow goals set. The legislature voted down an effort to set a target level just a few weeks ago, so that was not a good sign. A lot of different legislation of these that allows the Great Salt Lake to have a water right, and some efforts to, particularly in the industrial urban sector, to reduce and conserve water. I won't go into these since I think most of you have seen these before. So the results, overall minimal releases of water from industry and water districts have been dedicated to the lake. Got to start, and that's great, but as far as bringing the lake up appreciably, we're not there yet. Continued legislative action expected. I guess we'll hear about that after the legislature's finished. But so far, insignificant water dedicated to the problem. And then back on this legislation, one of the somewhat disarming comments, but I think it was by Governor Cox, is that we're going to rely entirely on voluntary efforts to get water to the lake. That hasn't worked in Iran. And so we'll have to see how it works here, or if it works. So the underlying issue, neither Iran or Utah seem to be addressing that huge population growth, right? And if we extrapolate out some estimates by the end of the century, we'll have a population of around 8 million people in Utah, and a lot of that, of course, in the Great Salt Lake Basin. So instead of trying to curtail growth so we don't exceed our water availability, sort of, you might say, living within our means, we're actually trying to increase the population. So we give tax breaks for companies to move to Utah. Then those industries themselves often need water. The people that are going to be working in those industries are going to require water. We give tax credits for people to have children. Right, so we have been and not just Utah, this all the United States, working on sort of a growth economy, and more people is better. But we're running up, at least in our basin here, on a shortage of water that has already greatly impacted the Great Salt Lake. And I would argue if we go to 8 million people, we're going to have a very difficult time maintaining the Great Salt Lake. So here's an example of this. This is out of our basin, but St. George Council warns that salt water supply could put brakes on a growth economy. All right, so that's been the model in the U.S. and a lot of places for decades, but it's difficult to see how we can reconcile that with a fixed amount of water. Putting the brakes on a growing population is a very slow process, but if we don't start now, we'll have a population of 8 million people in Utah, or looking beyond that, even more people, and it will be difficult to have a functioning Great Salt Lake. So another way of looking at that is we only have a given amount of water. It's sort of a zero-sum game. So we have water going out to agriculture, to water our lawns, to the salt ponds, and some water reaching the Great Salt Lake, but we know not enough water reaching the Great Salt Lake. And it's not actually, we don't really have a given amount of water, because climate change models suggest that by the end of the century, we're going to have 11 to 20% less water to deal with. So in terms of meeting goals for the lake and all our other uses, agriculture, homes and so forth, we have to take that into account. So even, if we save 11 to 20% in conservation, in agriculture, and in our homes, given that climate change is bearing on us and the population growth is bearing down on us, we need to take a really long-term perspective and think about how we're going to save the Great Salt Lake. So we've got an immediate problem right now. We've raised the berm. We're going to do some things in the short term, but this longer-term perspective needs to be taken into account. And when I presented this at the advisory council meeting, Tim Hawks commented that, well, we've been able to delay the implementation of the Bear River water development by 30 or 40 years from when it was initially thought to be needed. And I would argue that that's just, well, that's good, but it's just kicking the can down the road. So if we don't get a handle on our population growth and our water needs, the Great Salt Lake and other uses of water are going to be in a difficult situation. And I think I just said all that. finish up with a nice picture of the lake. Although somewhat desiccated.
It was awesome to hear that twice. I definitely learned more the second time. Thank you. We'll take questions. Laura?
Wait, I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm curious how, if your colleague presented any of this information in Lake Urmia and what their thoughts are on our situation or what they have learned or what they haven't learned from Great Salt Lake.
Yeah, so I initially got involved with Iran and Urmia maybe 8 years ago, 9 years ago. I was myself and Brad Martin and some others from the U.S. were invited to a conference, a Saving Lake Urmia conference, because they wanted to know what we were doing right to save our lake. Right? And so it's a little ironic that now I turn around and use Lake Urmia to say, well, here's what they've done wrong, and we're doing a lot of this wrong ourselves. So that's not really answering your questions. Samaya has, presented this information in Iran. The government's changed in Iran recently, and the recovery project team there, the whole effort is kind of under review because in part they haven't met goals, so whether it was their fault or not. And so I think there's a little bit of institutional turmoil going on. So that's a question I'll pose to Samaya, and I'll actually get back to you on that because I don't quite know the answers. Sarah, you've been working with Samaya too. Do you have any comments?
My feeling from her is that things are really challenging there. So I'm not sure how much she's presenting this to decisions.
It's a good thing they're easy here.
I think it's more challenging there. That's for sure.
Yeah, of course they've been in riots.
I was going to say, we're not actually killing people.
Right. Yeah. So
Priorities.
Yeah.
but anyway, so
Thank you.
they haven't been successful, but they're up against even greater population density, more demand for water, a bigger agricultural dominance in that basin than we have here.
Are there any other questions in the room, Bill?
Yeah, just Wayne, that's a really great comparison. I've shared it with a lot of people because it's so accessible. And I don't know if it's getting into the hands of legislators or not, whether it's that accessible, but it's really, really useful.
Okay.
And, instructive in terms of what the future might look like.
When we had the reprints or the PDFs, reprint as an old translator, the PDFs available, I sent that to a lot of legislators for how much they looked at.
Did you hear anything back?
No.
I'm surprised.
One of the things we're up against as scientists when we publish in these journals, we're required to put it in metric units. And sometimes I'm able to sneak in a little bit of English units on the side if the editors aren't watching too closely. But I think you give these graphs and things to people in metric units and they're just not familiar with them. It's just kind of lost. So that's, I'm sure the U.S. will change the metric system any year now.
But the cleanest solution clearly for Laura and Craig is a tunnel to the Snake River. Here's where
it's not on our workflow yet. But who knows?
Somebody needs to take that. I think Lynn had a couple questions.
Yeah, so Lynn's questions, the Urmia Transportation Causeway did not restrict water flows within the system, right?
No, it doesn't. Their breach in their automobile causeway is 1,500 feet wide and a huge bridge over that. Sarah and I and a number of people wound up with 40 people on a separate paper that was a data synthesis on Lake Urmia. And one of the things that came out of that, well, not really coming out of that synthesis, but a lot of people were proposing to open another breach in the Urmia Causeway so that the two sides could be equal. Well, I was arguing you need to do what we just did, and that's close that breach, cut your losses and have an aerial C type solution where you save something at least.
How do the rivers enter the lake? Is it all on one side like ours, or is it kind of distributed on both sides of that causeway?
The major inflow is on the south side. At least, well, it's a similar situation, I think, to what we have in Wynn. That you can look at the current flows, and the current flows are dominated in our system by, the Bear River, and in their system, the river hooks into their southernmost river, brings in a lion's share of the water. But that's not looking back to see what the natural flows were out of those systems and when the earliest dams were built. So right now we quote, well, we get this much water out of the Bear, but that's kind of a current situation. But we dammed the Jordan and Weaver a lot more than we have the Bear. So we get a bias
There's
flow.
9 dams on the Bear.
What?
There's 9 dams on the Bear.
None of them store any water except Bear Lake.
Okay, fair enough.
They're hydropower generated. I mean, a trivial amount of water, but
A couple more questions from Lynn. What is the average water year in Urmia's watershed, and were brine shrimp harvested as an economy?
I don't know what you mean by that first question, Lynn. What is the average water year? The months, or
How much water is contributed on an annual
Like
basis?
a mean annual flow.
Oh, I don't know the answer to that. You know that, sir?
No, I don't.
I can't answer that. That's available, but I don't have that at my fingertips. Brine shrimp, there's no large commercial industry. There's a bit of an artisanal industry of people collecting cysts around the shoreline that would accumulate, but it's quite small. Nothing comparable to what we have here.
Thanks, Wayne. So in the interest of time, we've got about 5 minutes left here. I just wanted to open up to folks in the room and online if you have any pertinent updates or things you'd like to share with the tech team. If you'd also prefer to send that to me via email, I'm happy to circulate that to the listserv. That I just open up the floor to anyone that wants to speak.
I thought Laura had something.
I have an update on the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan. We are well underway with developing the work plan for the Integrated Basin Plan, otherwise known as the Integrated Assessment, which you talked about in your presentation, Wayne. We're working on a situation assessment right now, developing a list of questions to talk to about 40 plus people in the Great Salt Lake watershed. We'll be starting those discussions in the next couple of weeks. We're working on a technical analysis of existing information basin-wide and working on a stakeholder involvement piece for the larger assessment. So we're hoping to have a draft plan or draft work plan late summer, and then the final work plan by November this year.
Thanks, Laura.
Great. Oh, and sorry, kind of one more thing. I announced this at a couple meetings ago. I'm not sure how many of you heard. Lynn mentioned it, but the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation awarded us $3.1 million in technical assistance for Great Salt Lake Basin study. So we're weaving that into the Great Salt Lake Integrated Assessment, and they're kind of like two projects become one. So we're trying to make sure that we meet the requirements of the basin study while also meeting the needs of Great Salt Lake Basin. So more conversations, presentations to come. And then the Bureau of Rec just also told us that they asked for $3 million in modeling on a whim a while ago, and they just got that for Great Salt Lake Basin.
How much?
So $3 million. Awesome. So there's federal money around, and I don't think we're done yet. So
Great. Thanks, Laura. Anyone else have any pertinent updates they'd like to share? Anyone online? All right. I guess quiet is a good sign. Our next meeting is going to be May 9th, exactly the same time and same place. Appreciate you all. What's that?
I thought it was at going to be here.
The next advisory council meeting, sorry, will be March 8th at the Eccles Wildlife Center. Tech team meetings the rest of this year will be in this room. Yeah, sorry for that confusion. And yeah, if anyone has questions, comments, concerns, feel free to reach out to myself or Ben, but really reach out to me instead. And I'm happy to help. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.